Welcome to Baalbek, the world's largest structure. Throughout history, humanity has built incredible monuments, structures that continue to amaze us even today. From pyramids to temples, from ancient cities to mysterious ruins, we often look back and wonder how such achievements were possible with limited technology. But every now and then, we encounter a place that doesn't just impress us, it challenges everything we think we know. One of those places is Baalbek. Located in modern-day Lebanon, in the fertile Bekaa Valley, Baalbek is often described as one of the greatest examples of Roman architecture. Massive columns, towering temples, and intricate stonework dominate the site, attracting historians, archaeologists, and tourists alike. At first glance, everything seems to fit neatly into the narrative of Roman engineering brilliance. But the moment you look closer, that narrative begins to fall apart, because beneath the visible Roman structures lies something far more mysterious, something that doesn't quite belong to the same story, something much older, and possibly much more advanced. At the heart of this mystery is a group of massive stone blocks known as the Trilithon. Each of these stones measures approximately 19 meters, 62 feet in length, over 4 meters, 14 feet in height, around 3.5 meters, 12 feet in thickness. And most astonishing of all, each one weighs close to 900 tons. To truly understand the scale of this, you need some context. The stones used at Stonehenge, around 25 tons. The largest blocks in the Great Pyramid of Giza, roughly 80 tons. Now compare that to 900 tons. These aren't just big stones. They are among the largest stones ever moved and placed by human hands, at least according to conventional history. But here's where things get even more puzzling. These stones were not carved and left in place. They were transported, they were lifted, and they were positioned with incredible precision, forming part of a massive foundation platform. Even today, moving something of that size would require advanced machinery, careful planning, and a significant amount of space. Yet Baalbek sits on elevated terrain, surrounded by uneven ground. So, how were these stones moved from the quarry, located nearly a kilometer away, and then lifted into position nearly 9 meters above the ground? No clear answer exists, and that's not speculation. That's a fact acknowledged even within mainstream archaeology. Roman engineers were undoubtedly brilliant. Their roads, aqueducts, and buildings are still admired today, but their lifting technology had limits. The largest Roman cranes are estimated to have been capable of lifting around 50 to 60 tons. That's impressive, but it's nowhere near 900 tons. Not even close. So if the Romans couldn't lift these stones, who did? Another detail raises even more questions. When Romans lifted heavy stones, they typically used a method involving Lewis holes, small carved cavities where metal clamps could be inserted for lifting. These marks are commonly found in Roman construction, but on the Trilithon stones, they are completely absent. No lifting holes. No visible attachment points. Nothing that suggests the use of known Roman techniques. It's as if these stones were placed using an entirely different method, one that we don't fully understand. And then there's the issue of purpose. These massive stones are not decorative. They're not meant to be seen. They are buried deep within the foundation of the structure, which leads to a simple but powerful question. Why would any civilization go to such extreme lengths to move and position stones of this size, only to hide them? it doesn't align with typical architectural priorities. Even the Romans, known for their love of grandeur and display, focused on visible elements, columns, facades, sculptures. But this is hidden engineering on an unimaginable scale, and it suggests something very different. Something intentional, something structural. Some researchers have proposed that these stones were used to stabilize the platform against seismic activity. Others believe they were part of an earlier construction phase, long before the Romans arrived. And that idea opens the door to an even bigger mystery. What if Baalbek wasn't originally built by the Romans at all? What if they simply built on top of something much older? There is evidence that the site has been inhabited for thousands of years, possibly as far back as 9000 BCE. That's long before recorded history as we know it, long before the rise of classical civilizations. And yet, here we have a foundation made of stones that modern engineers would struggle to replicate. But the mystery doesn't end with size and weight. Because when you examine the surface of these stones more closely, you begin to notice something even stranger. Across various parts of the megalithic blocks, there are long parallel striations, marks that appear to run consistently across the stone. Some of these marks extend for several meters. They are straight, they are evenly spaced, and they are far too uniform to be random. These are not natural formations. They are tool marks, but not the kind you would expect from primitive tools. In fact, many observers have pointed out that these marks bear a striking resemblance to those left behind by modern industrial cutting equipment. And here's where things take an even more intriguing turn. Similar marks have been identified in other ancient sites around the world. In China, at the Yangshan Quarry, massive unfinished stone blocks display nearly identical patterns. In Jordan, at Petra, similar markings can be found on ancient carved surfaces. These similarities raise an uncomfortable but fascinating possibility. Could these sites be connected, not culturally, not geographically, but technologically? Because if the same type of tool marks appear across different continents, in structures separated by thousands of kilometers, then we are left with two possibilities. Either multiple ancient civilizations independently developed similar advanced techniques, or they shared knowledge in ways we don't yet understand. And if that's the case, then our current understanding of ancient history may be far from complete. But this is only the beginning of the mystery, because Baalbek has far more to reveal, and what lies beyond the Trilithon is even more difficult to explain. If the massive foundation stones of Baalbek raise questions, what comes next turns those questions into something much deeper. Because the mystery here is not just about size, it's about precision. As you move through the Baalbek complex, especially around the southern megalithic wall, you begin to notice something extraordinary. Huge stone blocks, some weighing between 700 and 800 tons, are stacked together with an accuracy that feels almost unreal. At first glance, it may not seem unusual, but the closer you get, the more unsettling it becomes. The joints between these stones are so tight that in many places you can barely even see where one block ends and another begins. There are no large gaps, no visible filler, no signs of rough adjustment, just smooth, clean connections. In some areas, the stones don't even meet in simple straight lines. They connect at angles, complex angles. Which means whoever built this wasn't just stacking massive blocks. They were shaping them to fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Except this puzzle weighs hundreds of tons per piece. Now think about what that actually requires. Not only do you need to cut stones of enormous size, you also need to shape them with extreme accuracy, and then transport them, and finally place them into position with almost perfect alignment. All of this without modern measuring tools, without laser levels, without powered cutting machines. At least, that's what we're told. But the stones themselves tell a different story. When researchers examined the edges of these blocks closely, they discovered something even more puzzling. Along the borders where two stones meet, there are incredibly fine lines, almost like a deliberate finishing detail. These lines are extremely thin, in some cases less than 1/3 of a millimeter, and they run consistently along the edges, separating flat surfaces from beveled ones. This isn't random. This is intentional craftsmanship. Even more surprising is the nature of the bevels themselves. They are not rough or uneven. They are smooth, symmetrical, and in some places, even polished. The transitions between surfaces are so precise that they resemble modern machining more than ancient stonework. And that raises a critical question. What kind of tools could produce this level of detail? Because even with today's technology, achieving such consistency on stones of this size is not a simple task. Now consider this. Many of these stones show signs of multiple finishing stages. It's not just one cut. It's a sequence. Rough shaping, fine cutting, surface smoothing, edge detailing. Almost like a controlled, step-by-step manufacturing process. And yet, according to conventional history, all of this was done using basic hand tools. Chisels, hammers, simple implements. But when you compare these surfaces to those produced by modern machinery, the similarities are difficult to ignore. Parallel striations, uniform patterns, smooth finishes. These are characteristics we associate with mechanical processes, not primitive ones. And Baalbek isn't the only place where this has been observed. Across the world, similar features appear in other ancient sites. Again, we see patterns that suggest something more advanced than we expected. But Baalbek takes it to another level. Because here, the scale and precision exist together. And that combination is what makes it so hard to explain. Now, let's move beyond the limestone blocks, because the story becomes even more complex when we look at the columns. The Roman columns at Baalbek are famous. Massive, elegant, and towering over the ruins, they are among the largest columns ever built in the ancient world. Each one stands around 20 meters tall, and they were constructed using multiple cylindrical sections, known as drums. Each drum was carved separately and then lifted into place. This is consistent with Roman engineering methods. And importantly, each drum weighs around 50 to 60 tons, which fits perfectly within the known lifting capacity of Roman cranes. Everything here makes sense. Everything follows a logical explanation. But then, there are the other columns, the ones that don't follow this pattern. Scattered throughout the site are remains of much older columns. Unlike the Roman ones, these are not made of local limestone. They are made of rose granite, a material significantly harder and more difficult to work with. Even more unusual, these columns were not constructed in sections. They were carved from single pieces of stone, monolithic. And each one weighs up to 80 tons. Now that alone is impressive, but what truly makes them extraordinary is their origin. This granite did not come from nearby. It came from Aswan in Egypt, over 1,000 kilometers away. To transport such massive stones over that distance is already a monumental challenge. But the journey to Baalbek is not simple. It's not flat. It's not direct. It involves crossing difficult terrain, including mountainous regions. And yet somehow, these stones made it there. And not just roughly shaped. They arrived fully carved, perfectly formed. When you examine these granite columns closely, you notice something remarkable. The surfaces are incredibly smooth. The curves are consistent. The transitions between flat and rounded sections are sharp and precise. There are no visible errors, no unevenness, no signs of correction. It's as if they were shaped using tools capable of maintaining absolute control over the material. But here's the problem. Granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. Working with it requires tools that are stronger than the material itself. Today, we use diamond-tipped tools for that purpose. But such tools were not officially developed until the modern era. So, how were these ancient builders shaping granite with such accuracy? How were they achieving smooth, polished finishes without leaving behind obvious tool marks? And perhaps most importantly, how were they doing all of this consistently? Because one perfect column could be dismissed as an exception, but dozens, hundreds, that suggests a system, a method, a repeatable process. And that implies knowledge, advanced knowledge. At this point, the mystery of Baalbek is no longer just about moving big stones. It's about understanding a level of craftsmanship that doesn't seem to fit within the timeline we've been given. It forces us to reconsider something fundamental. Not just how these structures were built, but who built them. And whether the civilizations we study today were truly the first to reach this level of capability. Because if they weren't, then Baalbek may not just be an ancient site. It may be a remnant, a fragment of something much older, something that existed long before recorded history. And if that's true, then the final piece of this mystery lies not in the temples, but in the place where it all began, the Quarry. If Baalbek's temples challenge our understanding, then the Quarry completely shatters it. Because the most unbelievable discoveries are not found in the structures themselves, but in the place where those stones were born. Located just a short distance from the main complex, the Baalbek Quarry appears, at first like any other ancient stone extraction site. But the moment you step closer, you realize this is something entirely different. Scattered across the quarry are enormous stone blocks, some partially cut, others still attached to the bedrock, as if time suddenly stopped in the middle of the work. And among these stones lies one of the most famous monoliths in the world, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman. This massive block measures roughly 20 meters in length, 4 meters in height, 4 meters in width, and weighs over 1,000 tons. Even by Baalbek standards, that is enormous. What makes this stone so fascinating is its condition. It's not fully detached. One side still connects to the bedrock beneath it, as if the workers were in the process of freeing it, and then suddenly stopped. No signs of completion, no evidence of transport attempts, just abandonment. But for years, this stone was considered the largest, until something even more astonishing was discovered. In 2014, archaeologists uncovered another massive block buried deeper within the quarry. A stone even larger, estimated at around 1,650 tons. To put that into perspective, this is one of the largest stone blocks ever identified in human history, and it was never moved. Never used, it simply remained there, hidden beneath the earth for thousands of years, which raises a critical question. If these ancient builders were capable of moving 900-ton stones, why would they leave behind even larger ones? Was it too heavy? Did something go wrong? Or did something happen that forced them to abandon the site entirely? Because when you look at the quarry as a whole, it doesn't feel completed. It feels interrupted, like a project frozen in time. And that idea opens the door to a powerful possibility. What if Baalbek was never finished? What if whatever civilization was responsible for these constructions disappeared before they could complete their work? There are signs that support this. Across the quarry and the temple complex, you can see broken stones, shattered fragments, and partially worked surfaces. Some granite pieces appear fractured in ways that suggest immense force, not simple wear and tear, but something sudden, something violent. Some researchers have proposed that a major natural disaster, perhaps an earthquake or a series of catastrophic events, could have halted construction. Others go further, suggesting that the site may have been affected by a much larger global-scale event, a cataclysm that wiped out entire populations. While these ideas remain speculative, one thing is clear. Something caused the work at Baalbek to stop. And whatever it was, it left behind one of the greatest engineering mysteries on Earth. Now consider the logistics once again. Even with modern cranes, transporting a 1000-ton block is an enormous challenge. It requires space, coordination, and advanced equipment. At Baalbek, the terrain is uneven. The path from the quarry to the temple is uphill. There is no clear evidence of prepared roads or transport systems capable of handling such loads. So how were these stones supposed to be moved? And more importantly, how were they actually moved in the case of the Trilithon? Because, unlike the quarry stones, those were successfully transported and placed. Which means, at some point in the past, the builders had a method, a working method. One that allowed them to cut massive stones, shape them with precision, move them across difficult terrain, and position them perfectly, all without leaving behind clear evidence of how they did it. And that is what makes Baalbek so unique. It's not just one mystery, it's a chain of mysteries, each one leading to another, and none of them fully explained.